The morning I shut off the main water valve on my ranch, I expected a quiet day of scheduled maintenance. I had already filed the required paperwork, posted legal notices, and hired a licensed crew to replace an aging pressure valve that had served the property for decades. Everything was planned down to the hour. Less than 20 minutes later, my phone started exploding with calls. By the time I stepped outside, I could hear shouting from the road. Dozens of angry homeowners from the nearby HOA subdivision were gathering at my front gate, waving empty water bottles and demanding answers. Their sprinklers had stopped. Their faucets had gone dry. Someone kept yelling that the entire neighborhood had lost water. Then a white SUV screeched to a stop. HOA President Karen jumped out, pointed straight at me, and shouted, "You're shutting off public water. I'm calling 911. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at the maintenance crew replacing the valve and waited. Because Karen had just called the police on the only person legally authorized to shut that water off, and she had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. My name is Daniel Carter, and my family has owned this ranch in western Texas for more than 40 years. Long before expensive homes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and HOA entrance signs appeared down the road, this land was simply open pasture, cattle, and hard work. My grandfather bought the property when almost nobody wanted it, then spent years building everything with his own hands, including the private well, storage tanks, pumps, and the underground water system that kept the ranch alive. When he passed the ranch down to my father, and later to me, he left one rule above all others: take care of the land, and the land will take care of you. I've followed that advice every single day. Life on the ranch is peaceful. I raise cattle, repair fences, maintain equipment, and handle every part of the property myself whenever I can. I stay out of other people's business and expect the same respect in return. Most of my neighbors know me as the quiet rancher who's always willing to lend a tractor or help fix a broken fence. That's why I never imagined I'd end up in a fight with an HOA. The subdivision next to my ranch wasn't even there when my grandfather built our water system. To me, they were simply neighbors living nearby. Unfortunately, the new HOA president saw things very differently, and she was about to turn my peaceful ranch into the center of the biggest neighborhood controversy anyone had ever seen. Everything changed the year Karen Whitmore became the new HOA president. She didn't just want to manage the subdivision, she wanted to control everything she could see from its entrance, including property that wasn't even part of the HOA. It started with letters in my mailbox. The first one demanded that I repaint my old red barn because it was visually inconsistent with the neighborhood's appearance. The second complained that my cattle could be seen from the main road and suggested I install decorative fencing. A week later, she insisted that my tractors and hay equipment were unsightly and should be stored out of public view. Each time, I calmly replied with the same answer: "My ranch isn't part of your HOA." I even included copies of my property records showing that my land had never been included in the subdivision. Any reasonable person would have accepted the facts and moved on. Karen wasn't a reasonable person. Instead, she began driving slowly past my ranch almost every afternoon, taking photos of my fences, barns, livestock, and equipment. Soon, she started showing up at my front gate, claiming she was documenting community violations. She spoke as though she had authority over land she'd never owned and rules that had never applied to me. The more I ignored her demands, the more determined she became to prove she was in charge. I figured she'd eventually get bored and move on to someone else. I couldn't have been more wrong. Karen wasn't looking for a compromise. She was looking for a way to force me to obey, and she had no idea that the very ranch she wanted to control was quietly supplying something her entire neighborhood depended on every single day. Most people looked at my ranch and saw cattle, fences, and wide-open fields. What they couldn't see was the network of underground pipes running beneath the grass, pipes that had been there long before the HOA subdivision ever existed. Back in the early 1990s, a development company bought the land next to our ranch to build a new neighborhood. There was just one problem. The nearest public water connection was miles away, and extending a new main line would have cost the developers a fortune. Instead, they approached my grandfather with another idea. After months of meetings with county officials, engineers, and lawyers, they signed a legally recorded easement agreement. The developers were allowed to connect the new subdivision to the main water line that crossed our ranch, but only under strict conditions. The pipeline itself would remain part of our private infrastructure, and my family would continue maintaining the main shutoff valve, pressure equipment, and the section of pipe crossing our property. The neighborhood could receive water through that connection, but ownership of the critical equipment never changed. For decades, the arrangement worked perfectly. Every ranch owner before me performed the required annual inspections and maintenance, while the subdivision enjoyed a reliable water supply without giving the system much thought. Then Karen became HOA president. She read the neighborhood handbook from cover to cover but never bothered reading the county property records or the original easement agreement. As far as she was concerned, the water simply appeared whenever someone turned on a faucet. A week after one of her latest arguments at my front gate, my contractor called with a reminder that our yearly inspection was due. The aging pressure valve had to be replaced before it failed, and county regulations required the water line to be temporarily shut off during the repair. I scheduled the maintenance immediately. I had no idea that one routine repair was about to throw an entire neighborhood into complete chaos. I wasn't about to give anyone an excuse to accuse me of cutting corners, so I handled the maintenance exactly the way the county required. 3 days before the repair, I filed the necessary paperwork, confirmed the schedule with the licensed contractor, and made sure every required notification was delivered. Notices were posted at the subdivision entrance, emailed to the HOA office, and sent to the county water department. The temporary shutdown would last only a few hours, just long enough to replace the aging pressure valve safely. At 7 o'clock sharp, my crew arrived with their equipment. We closed the main valve, drained the section of pipeline, and immediately began removing the old parts. Everything was going according to plan. Then the phone started ringing. Within minutes, homeowners across the subdivision realized their faucets had stopped running. Automatic sprinklers shut off in the middle of watering lawns. Coffee shops and small businesses nearby struggled without water. Parents complained they couldn't get their children ready for school, and social media quickly filled with angry posts demanding answers. Instead of checking the notices or calling the county, Karen jumped into action. She stormed onto my ranch in her white SUV, slammed the door, and marched straight toward the work crew. Pointing at the open pipeline, she shouted that I had no right to hold an entire neighborhood hostage. She demanded I turn the water back on immediately, even though the pressure valve was already sitting in pieces on the ground. I calmly explained that licensed workers were performing scheduled maintenance and that restoring the water before the repairs were complete could damage the entire system and put everyone at risk. Karen didn't listen. She pulled out her phone, stepped a few feet away, and dialed 911. Loud enough for everyone to hear, she accused me of deliberately shutting off public utilities and creating an emergency. The maintenance crew exchanged nervous looks, but I simply folded my arms and waited. Because I knew something Karen didn't. Every document proving I had acted legally was sitting inside my ranch office, and the deputies responding to her call were about to see every single one of them. Less than 15 minutes after Karen made the call, 2 sheriff's deputies pulled into my ranch, followed by a county water inspector. Their lights flashed across the pasture as they stepped out and walked toward the crowd. Karen rushed over before anyone else could speak. "There he is," she shouted, pointing at me. "He shut off the neighborhood's public water on purpose. Arrest him before he turns it back on whenever he feels like it." One of the deputies raised a hand, asking everyone to calm down. He turned to me and simply said, "Sir, we'd like to hear your side." I nodded and invited them into my ranch office. Inside, I laid everything on the desk: the recorded property deed, the easement agreement signed decades earlier, the county-approved maintenance permit, inspection reports, contractor licenses, and copies of every notice sent before the shutdown. The water inspector carefully reviewed each document, comparing dates, signatures, and official stamps. After several quiet minutes, he looked up and smiled. "Everything is in order," he said. "This maintenance was properly scheduled, legally required, and fully reported. Mr. Carter has every right to temporarily shut down this private section of the system while repairs are completed. The deputy stepped back outside with the inspector and addressed the growing crowd. The shutdown is completely legal, he announced. No crime has been committed. The repairs are necessary for the safety of the water system. A wave of murmurs spread through the neighborhood. Karen's confident expression disappeared almost instantly. Several homeowners turned toward her, asking why she had ignored the maintenance notices and called 911 without checking the facts. Others began questioning whether she had ever bothered to understand how the neighborhood's water system actually worked. For the first time since becoming HOA president, Karen had no answers, and the toughest questions were only just beginning. Just when everyone thought the situation was over, the county water inspector asked one question that changed everything. Who has been collecting the neighborhood's infrastructure maintenance fees? The crowd fell silent. Karen quickly answered, the HOA has. We collect them every year as part of the annual dues. The inspector frowned. Then I'd like to see the maintenance records and financial reports for those funds. Karen hesitated. She claimed the documents were in the HOA office and blamed the previous board for handling the paperwork. But when the inspector requested the records, several current and former board members admitted they had never seen detailed reports showing where the money had actually gone. Within days, the county opened a formal review of the HOA's financial records. Residents discovered they had been paying maintenance fees for years, believing the HOA was helping maintain the shared water infrastructure. In reality, almost none of that money had been used for the system connected to my ranch. Routine inspections, repairs, and emergency maintenance had been handled entirely at my family's expense, just as they had been for decades. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than Karen's 911 call. Homeowners who had once shouted at my front gate were now demanding answers from the HOA board. An emergency community meeting was packed with frustrated residents asking where their money had gone and why they had never been told about the legal easement or the true history of the water system. By the end of the meeting, Karen stood alone at the front of the room. The same neighbors who had trusted her only days earlier were now calling for her resignation, convinced that her reckless decisions and poor leadership had embarrassed the entire community. By late afternoon, the new pressure valve was installed, the system passed its final inspection, and I slowly reopened the main water line. Within minutes, water flowed back through every home in the neighborhood. Faucets ran again, sprinklers came to life, and the panic disappeared as quickly as it had started. A week later, the HOA held a special meeting. Faced with overwhelming pressure from residents, Karen resigned as HOA president before a formal vote could remove her. The board also agreed to release its financial records for an independent audit and promised greater transparency moving forward. As for me, I returned to the only life I had ever wanted, taking care of my ranch, my cattle, and the land my grandfather had trusted me to protect. That day reminded everyone of a simple truth: respect property rights, learn the facts before making accusations, and never confuse quiet confidence with weakness. Sometimes, the strongest response isn't an argument, it's letting the truth speak for itself.